Hello and welcome to Newsweek South Asia, your one-stop destination for in-depth analysis of security challenges, regional conflicts and the evolving threat of terrorism. Let's take a look at the headlines first. BLA hijacks Jafar Express amid rising unrest in Balochistan. Radical Islamist groups challenge Bangladesh's stability. And Taliban's crackdown on women sparks global outrage. Pakistan's restive Balochistan province has once again been thrust into the spotlight with a daring act of defiance by Baloch separatists. The recent hijacking of the Jafar Express by the Baloch Liberation Army is a stark reminder of the deep-rooted insurgency gripping the region. While the Pakistani military claims to have successfully ended the crisis, the attack signals a growing resistance against Islamabad policies in Balochistan, where decades of repression, enforced disappearances, and economic exploitation continue to fuel the separatist movement. Balochistan, Pakistan's largest yet most neglected province, remains a battleground for an independent struggle. The Baloch Liberation Army, which has long accused the Pakistani state of treating the province as a colony, carried out its latest act of defiance by hijacking the Jafar Express. The train carrying nearly 400 passengers had left Quetta, the provincial capital, when BLA fighters intercepted it near a series of tunnels approximately 160 kilometers away. Pakistani security forces launched a military operation, ultimately rescuing 346 passengers. Officials claim that all 33 attackers were killed in the operation. However, while Islamabad brands the Baloch insurgents as terrorists, experts argue that the state's own human rights record stands in stark contrast.
One thing you have to give to the Baloch freedom fighters, I think they have been extremely chivalrous even in their attacks. Unlike the Pakistan army, or even for that matter some of the Islamist groups who attack women, children, old people, people who are innocent, the Baloch are very, very particular about whom they hit, whom they attack. They can always be collateral damage, but they normally, there's been no case where they've been killing women and children, no case where they've been killing any elder person. So they have been very chivalrous in that count. I don't think anybody can say the same about the Pakistan army, which in its operations goes into the houses of the Baloch people, insults their women, beats up their children, catches hold of young men and even women, and arrests them without any legal process.
For decades, Islamabad has responded to the Baloch resistance with brute force. The military's notorious kill and dump policy operations have claimed the lives of thousands of Baloch students and activists. Many young men and women have been forcibly taken from their university hostels in Punjab, Sindh and Balochistan, never to be seen again. The bodies of those executed are often discarded in remote areas, serving as grim warnings to others.
Some cases has been responsible for the killing of young students. These are university-going students in Punjab or even in Balochistan or in Sindh. They are picked up from their hostels and tortured, sometimes released, sometimes they disappear forever, and other times they are killed in cold blood and their bodies are thrown to make an example of them. So we've not seen the Baloch do this. They have attacked who they call agents of the Pakistani state and whom they consider to be legitimate targets. That sometimes includes the Punjabis who are settlers in Balochistan, whom the Baloch consider to be agents of the Pakistan government.
Balochistan has witnessed at least 5 major separatist uprisings since Pakistan's formation in 1947. The latest insurgency, which began in the early 2000s, initially sought greater control over the province's resources. However, years of state repression pushed the movement towards demand for complete independence. The Baloch Liberation Army emerged in the late 1990s, led by Balach Mari, the son of veteran nationalist leader Nawab Khair Bakhsh Mari. In recent years, the group has escalated its operations, carrying out over 150 attacks last year alone, culminating in this recent train hijacking.
The possibility that the Baloch might actually start executing all the hostages cannot be entirely written off. I think that is pretty much on the cards. In part because of the kind of anger there is in Balochistan among the Baloch rebel groups to the kind of high-handedness that the Pakistan Army and the kind of operations that the Pakistan Army has been conducting. Now, sometimes, these kind of threats are made that we will kill all the hostages if you don't, if you carry out any operation against us, or if you don't meet our demands. But this could also be seen as some kind of a negotiating stance, to get some kind of negotiations going to get whatever people you want to release. But also remember that operations like the one which is currently underway in this train case, these people who go into these kind of operations are ready to die.
Despite being rich in natural resources, Balochistan remains Pakistan's most impoverished region, home to around 15 million people. These resources generate billions in revenue for the federal government, yet the Baloch people see little benefit. Adding to local resentment is Gwadar, a major deep sea port central to the $62 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor. While Islamabad touts it as a game changer for Pakistan's economy, Baloch nationalists argue that the state exploits their land while sidelining their people, fueling the flames of insurgency. The Jafar Express hijacking is just the latest chapter in Balochistan's long history of resistance. And as the conflict escalates, it remains to be seen whether Islamabad will continue its policy of suppression or finally address the grievances of a province long treated as an afterthought. Bangladesh is once again grappling with the resurgence of radical Islamist extremism. A violent demonstration by the banned militant group Hizb-ut-Tahrir in Dhaka has reignited concerns over the country's security and stability, with extremists openly defying law enforcement and calling for the replacement of democracy with an Islamic caliphate. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Is Bangladesh heading towards an Islamist takeover? Let's take a closer look.
The streets of Bangladesh's capital Dhaka witnessed a disturbing resurgence of radical Islamist extremism as the banned militant group Hizb-ut-Tahrir openly defied law enforcement, calling for the dismantling of the country's secular democracy in favor of an Islamic caliphate. The radical march, held after Friday prayers at the Baitul Mukarram Mosque, saw hundreds of extremists clashing with security forces, raising concerns over the deteriorating law and order under caretaker administration of Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. Bangladesh's law enforcement was forced to deploy tear gas and sound grenades to disperse the protesters as they broke through barricades and chanted extremist slogans. Experts argue that the caretaker administration's failure to curb extremism is leading to an alarming rise in Islamist influence, threatening not just Bangladesh's secular framework but also regional stability.
the rise of these proscribed banned organizations, for example, Hizb ut-Tahrir and others, is of great concern because if you see in the United Kingdom, and they have been banned, and by other Western liberal democracies as well, they pose a very significant and a very, I would say, terrible and treacherous threat to not only Bangladesh but the entire neighborhood. So I think this is the first step. What these organizations are trying to do is to impose a state of fear, to disrupt the liberal and pluralistic principles of the Bengali way of life, and to impose upon what, again, if we go back, I think all of this stems from the 1971 partition of India and the two-nation theory. So I think that segment of society in Bangladesh, which is currently unfortunately on the rise, they want to go back, they want to turn the clock back to 1947 and live with that Islamic identity of Pakistan in a different shape and form, transcribed into 2025.
This brazen display of defiance signals a dangerous shift in the country's political landscape, where Islamist factions are reclaiming ground amid growing instability. The political uncertainty following the forced exile of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in August 2024 has left Bangladesh vulnerable to extremist elements. Under her leadership, groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir were banned due to their anti-state activities. However, her ousting, triggered by violent student-led protests, has created a power vacuum, allowing radical outfits to re-emerge. India has raised serious concerns over Bangladesh's deteriorating security situation, reporting over 2,374 attacks on minorities between August 5, 2024 and February 16, 2025. While Bangladeshi police have verified 1,254 of these cases, an alarming 98% were deemed political in nature. The caretaker government's lax approach towards extremist groups has emboldened radicals, leading to a surge in violence, particularly targeting minorities.
I think the present administration, the caretaker government, has to actually prove and step up their activities and effects in order to curb these kinds of disturbances, because we have seen no evidence, and it is seeming likely that they are actually turning a blind eye towards all of these atrocities which is going on unabated day in day out. We can see extrajudicial executions, loot, arson, and at the end of the day all of these are being targeted towards the minority communities who are bearing the brunt. When I say minority, I not only mean the religious minority, for example, Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, the members of the third gender, LGBT, but also the common ordinary Bengali person, irrespective of their caste, color, creed, their cultural identity and their way of life is being targeted by these organizations. And it seems likely that the administration has got a very definitive and proactive support so they can operate unabated and almost in an insulated way.
The country's fragile security apparatus, combined with a government seemingly unwilling or unable to rein in extremists, is creating a fertile ground for radicalization. The sight of thousands of radicals marching freely through Dhaka is a stark warning. Bangladesh is teetering on the edge of an Islamist resurgence. Unless decisive action is taken, the progress made in curbing extremism under the previous administration risks being completely undone.
Afghan women continue to face one of the most brutal crackdowns on rights and freedoms in modern history. Since seizing power, the Taliban has imposed sweeping restrictions, banning education, employment, and even women's voices in public life. Despite growing global outrage, the Taliban remains defiant, dismissing criticism and justifying its oppressive policies. With Afghanistan increasingly isolated on the world stage, the question remains, will the international pressure force change, or will Afghan women continue to suffer in silence? On the eve of International Women's Day, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a stark warning. Women's rights are under attack and the world must take action. Nowhere is this regression more apparent than in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, where women and girls have been stripped of their most basic freedoms. Decades of progress has been erased, plunging Afghan women into a life of subjugation and fear.
We must never accept a world where women and girls live in fear, where their safety is a privilege rather than a non-negotiable right.
Despite mounting global pressure, the Taliban issued a statement reaffirming their so-called commitment to safeguarding women's rights. Chief spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid claimed in a social media post that the Islamic Emirate assumes full responsibility for protecting Afghans' women's rights, emphasizing dignity, honor, and legal protections such as dowry entitlements and inheritance rights. However, these claims stand in stark contrast to the harsh realities on the ground. Since taking power, the Taliban has imposed sweeping bans on education and employment for women. Girls have been barred from secondary schools, followed by a complete prohibition on attending and teaching at Kabul University. In August 2023, the Vice and Virtue Ministry expanded restrictions, banning women's voices in public and mandating full face coverings outside their homes.
According to the agreement that was signed in Doha between the Taliban and the United States and some other countries, that they were to provide full equality of treatment as far as women are concerned. But they are not behaving according to that, and they had said that Taliban 2.0 is going to be very different from Taliban 1.0 when they were in power in the 1990s and they had persecuted. And right now also, whether it is repression, whether it is torture, whether it is not allowing women to go out at all, they are really treated as second-class citizens or worse.
The Taliban remains globally isolated, with no country officially recognizing its rule over Afghanistan due to its oppressive policies on women. In January, the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor sought arrest warrants for 2 senior Taliban officials for their role in repressing Afghan women. Despite international condemnation, the Taliban continues to justify its brutal policies under the guise of so-called Islamic values. However, leading Islamic scholars worldwide have rejected this interpretation, calling it a distortion of religion to justify systematic misogyny. The plight of Afghan women has not gone unnoticed. In Paris, the Eiffel Tower was illuminated with the message, SOS Afghan Women, in a symbolic act of solidarity coinciding with International Women's Day marches across the globe.
From Afghanistan to the DRC, from Palestine, Gaza, to Haiti, to Myanmar, Sudan, and beyond, women bear the heaviest burdens of conflict, displacement, hardship, and loss. Yet we know that when women are at the table, peace is broader, more inclusive, and more enduring.
But within Afghanistan, women are not even allowed a seat at the table. Instead, they are silenced, beaten, and detained for daring to speak out. The United Nations Special Rapporteur has previously stated that the Taliban's treatment of women may amount to crimes against humanity. As the Taliban's draconian rule continues, Afghanistan faces increasing diplomatic isolation. But beyond political consequences, the real tragedy lies with the millions of Afghan women who have been stripped of their voices, dreams, and futures. As the world marks another International Women's Day, Afghan women remain prisoners in their own country, waiting for the day when their rights are no longer a distant hope but a lived reality. Hello and welcome to our show, where we delve into the most pressing geopolitical issues shaping our region and the world. Today, we focus on Pakistan's escalating security crisis, with terrorism surging to alarming levels. From the growing influence of the TTP to the ongoing insurgency in Balochistan, the country faces serious internal threats with far-reaching consequences. To discuss this, we have with us Dr. Dipankar Sen Gupta, a geopolitical expert and professor of economics at the University of Jammu. Dr. Sen Gupta, thank you for joining us. Let's begin with Pakistan's worsening security situation. It has now become the second most terrorism-affected country in the world. Dr. Sen Gupta, what are the key factors driving this surge in terrorist activity, and how has the state's response measured up?
I think Pakistan's own internal politics, internal policies have contributed a lot to its dubious position. Also, the fact that from time to time it allowed itself to be the cat's paw for sometimes American policies against the Soviet Union that I think completed this mess. So, if you look at Balochistan is entirely domestically created, and it's been a policy of deceit. Initially, it is not known that Muhammad Ali Jinnah would argue for the ruler of Balochistan, actually the Khan of Korak, that this entity was actually independent. But when he became Governor General, he basically turned around. And secondly, given Balochistan's enormous resources, Pakistan has tried its utmost to crush any aspirations and to extract all its resources without investing anything in Balochistan. On the other hand, you have Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Initially, if you look at the polity of the Northwestern Frontier Post, as it was known by, it was a secular politics. In 1946, they voted in a Congress government. And this is the politics that the Pakistani government has been trying to change into a very communal politics. Firstly, for initial stability, and then secondly, as it started to foment jihad in Afghanistan against the Soviet occupation force, it also poisoned the politics of the Northwestern Frontier Post. And that is why, partly for domestic reasons and partly as an instrument of foreign policy, they undertook such politics, they undertook such measures that NWFP has become a hotbed of terrorism.
The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has emerged as a major security threat, with reports linking its growing influence to the Taliban's return in Afghanistan. How has the Taliban's rule strengthened the TTP, and to what extent is Kabul responsible for its resurgence in Pakistan?
Look, I mean, this is very ironic. After the fall of the Taliban in 2001 initially, Pakistan bided its time for a couple of years and then started to encourage the Taliban wholeheartedly to come back. And let us face it, American short-sightedness, foolishness they were complicit in this, and as a result of which, Taliban is able to make a comeback. There is no counter policy to ensure that the Afghan policy is finally able to take on the Taliban, and ultimately Pakistan wins a great victory on the face of it, letting Taliban seize power and aided and abetted by the Americans. They thought that the Taliban would be forever grateful to them and they would get a tremendous strategic space. Strategic depth is something that the Pakistanis have been talking about. Literally realizing that the Taliban are loyal only to themselves. They took Pakistan's help, they're contemptuous of Pakistan. And the Taliban never ever have accepted the Durand line as the de facto or the de jure border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The only government in Afghanistan that agreed to that particular border was Najibullah's government, in the PDP government in 1987, which Pakistan and Americans brought down. And this government, which they helped to install, have played Pashtun politics. They have said we don't recognize this particular border at all, and they have played host to the TTP. After all, whether Afghan Taliban is concerned, there is no difference between them and the TTP. You may call it Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, but they are Pashtuns, and they have helped their Pashtun brethren to do whatever they want, because in their minds they're absolutely clear that the Northwestern Frontier Post was and shall be a part of Afghanistan.
Despite several counter-terrorism operations, Pakistan has been unable to root out militancy. Some experts argue that the state's selective approach, cracking down on certain groups while tolerating others for strategic purposes, has contributed to this failure. Would you agree with this assessment?
Look, Pakistan, there are two strategies Pakistan adopts. One is a strategy which is not counter-terrorism, it is absolutely murder and genocide. In 1973, aided and abetted by the Shah of Iran, who supplied air power, the Pakistani army crushed, killed entire villages. You see, when you kill everybody, then obviously you have to succeed. And that's what Pakistan did in the early 70s. Counter strategy, as Pakistan knows it, is basically to try and buy people out. Okay. Now, in Balochistan, the disadvantage is the terrain, vast land. The advantages is a relatively very small population. Of the provinces, Balochistan's population actually is the lowest. And that is one disadvantage that Balochis have in their fight against the Pakistani state. So, what it does in the Balochistan is basically to kill, indiscriminately kill, and I fear for the Balochis it will happen again. I mean, killing Nawab Bukti, which Musharraf did when he was president, was actually not required. But if they kill to send a message, they will basically, I think, hold some massive massacres in some Baloch villages to send a signal to the population, secure in the knowledge that the world will not criticize them.
Finally, Pakistan's economic woes continue to mount, and with a rise in terrorism, foreign investors and allies may start pulling away. How do you see this trend affecting Pakistan's economic stability, and what steps, if any, can the government take to restore confidence?
I mean, there are two aspects to it. One is when you talk about foreign investment, largely Pakistan was looking at Belt and Road initiatives, investment by the Chinese in Pakistan. Pakistan now has come to realize that this particular investment actually comes with a very high tag. The returns from this investment will never be enough to pay the interest rate on this loan, far less the principal. On the other hand, the Chinese are also coming to realize that they are being specifically targeted. And this is something that the Baloch Liberation Army has made it very clear, that the Chinese with the Pakistanis are an occupying power and they will target the Chinese combatants. Once Chinese nationals are targeted for assassination and Chinese assets are targeted for sabotage, I think the Chinese will also start to do a rethink. They will probably realize that it is not worth investing in this particular place because whatever they invest in, roads, railways, can be easily sabotaged.
This was an insightful discussion, Dr. Sen Gupta. Thank you for your time and expertise. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We'll be back next week with more news, views, and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, to keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Shivangi Mishra signing off on behalf of the entire production team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.